The creaking of worn-out sneakers against the asphalt set the hurried pace of Jack's steps. At 15, he bore the weight of responsibilities no teenager should have to carry. The afternoon sun was beginning its lazy descent on the horizon as he crossed the busy downtown streets, racing against time to get to his second job of the day. His thoughts wandered to the small apartment where his mother, Sophie, rested, battling an illness that consumed not only her health but also the family's meager savings. Medical bills piled up on the kitchen table like cruel reminders that there was no time to be just a teenager. The path to the diner where he worked at night took him through the most affluent part of the city. It was like crossing a portal between worlds. On one side, his neighborhood with its worn-out buildings and modest dreams. On the other, mansions that seemed to compete in grandeur with the sky itself. Jack often imagined the lives unfolding behind those ornate gates, so different from his own reality. Then, a scream shattered the routine of the afternoon like breaking glass. On the sidewalk in front of him, near the gate of a private school, a scene unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. A girl who couldn't have been much older than him was struggling against two men trying to drag her into a black car. Time seemed to freeze. Jack felt his heart race, pumping adrenaline through his veins. His mind screamed at him to keep walking. He already had too many problems, already carried too many burdens. But his body moved on its own, driven by something stronger than fear. "Hey!" The shout escaped his throat before he could think. His feet were already running toward the commotion. The men hesitated for a moment, surprised by the interruption. It was all the girl needed. She managed to break free but stumbled. Jack reached her just in time to stop her fall. The sound of distant sirens made the kidnappers give up. The car sped away, leaving behind only the echo of tires screeching on the asphalt and the smell of burnt rubber. Jack found himself holding the trembling arms of the girl, her wide brown eyes meeting his in fear. "Are you okay?" he asked, his own voice trembling slightly. "Melissa," she answered, still gasping for breath. "My name is Melissa." Before Jack could respond, a small army of security guards appeared, surrounding them. Amid the ensuing confusion, Jack realized that his life was about to change drastically. What he didn't know was that that moment of instinctive courage had just opened the door to a carefully buried past. A past that connected his humble family to one of the most powerful in the city in ways he could never have imagined. The sun had finally set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, as if nature itself wanted to mark the moment when destiny decided to rewrite the story of a young man merely trying to survive in a world that seemed too vast for his weary shoulders. Alexander Bennett's office exuded power. Through the windows on the 20th floor, the city stretched out like a carpet of lights beneath the night sky. Jack felt out of place, his worn-out sneakers sinking into the plush carpet as he watched the man who might be his uncle examine an old photograph with trembling hands. The revelation had come like an avalanche. After the incident with Melissa, the truth had emerged from the shadows of the past like a long-kept secret finally coming to light. Sophie, his mother, had kept the story of his father buried for 15 years. A story of forbidden love with Thomas Bennett, Alexander's younger brother, who had died before Jack was born. "You have his eyes," Alexander murmured, his voice laden with restrained emotion. "The same eyes as Thomas?" He placed the photograph on the polished mahogany desk. A young man with a radiant smile, the same eyes as Jack, embracing Sophie, both glowing with happiness. Melissa sat on one of the leather sofas, watching the scene with a mix of fascination and concern. Since the moment of the rescue, she had refused to leave Jack's side, as if afraid he might vanish if she blinked. "Why?" The question slipped from Jack's lips, directed not at Alexander but at his mother, who sat silently in the chair beside him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophie closed her eyes, silent tears rolling down her pale face. "To protect you, my son. The Bennett family, they had so much power, so much money. I was just a waitress when I met your father. When Thomas died," her voice faltered, "I was afraid they would try to take you away from me." Alexander stood abruptly, walking to the window. "My brother?" His voice trembled slightly. "Thomas was always the best of us. He saw beauty where I only saw numbers, possibilities where I only saw risks." Turning to Sophie, he continued, "If I had known, if only he had told me." "It doesn't matter anymore," Melissa interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "What matters is the present. Jack saved my life today. He proved to be more of a Bennett than anyone could have imagined." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Jack felt the weight of 15 years of secrets on his shoulders, along with the expectations now emerging on his horizon. His mind wandered to the small apartment he called home, to the endless medical bills, to the dreams that seemed impossible to achieve. "I don't want anything," Jack finally said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "I don't need the Bennett name or the money. I just want to take care of my mother." Alexander turned slowly, his eyes meeting Jack's with an intensity that made the young man swallow hard. "You're more like Thomas than you know," he said softly. "He always put others first too." The night advanced outside, but inside that office, time seemed suspended. In that moment, four people connected by ties of blood, destiny, and choice faced the beginning of a journey that would change their lives forever. The days that followed brought changes Jack could never have imagined. The small apartment he shared with Sophie now saw regular visits from private doctors, sent by Alexander. The worries about medical bills, which had once weighed like stones on his young shoulders, began to dissipate, but others took their place. Melissa showed up almost every day after school, bringing with her an energy that lit up the modest rooms. She sat in the small kitchen, sharing stories about her world while Sophie prepared tea in mismatched cups. The wealthy girl Jack had saved proved surprisingly unpretentious, finding comfort in the simplicity of their home. "You know," Melissa said one afternoon as she helped Jack with the dishes, "I've never had anything like this before." Her hands immersed in soapy water, she felt more comfortable here than in her own mansion. "At home everything is so controlled. Here I can breathe." Jack watched her, realizing how she belonged to that moment, to that simple kitchen, more than to the grand rooms where she had grown up. "Sometimes the simplest things are the truest," he replied, surprising himself with the depth of his words. Sophie observed the growing friendship between the young people with a mix of joy and apprehension. One afternoon, after Melissa had left, she called Jack to sit beside her on the worn-out sofa. "Your father was like that," she said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of an old photograph. "Thomas always found beauty in simple things. That's why his family never understood him." She hesitated, her next words heavy with regret. "Maybe I should have trusted his love more, believed that Alexander could change." At the company, Alexander wrestled with his own demons. In important meetings, his eyes often wandered to the photograph now framed on his desk. His younger brother, forever young, smiling with the promise of a future he never lived. "He would be very proud of you," Alexander told Jack during an impromptu lunch in his office. His uncle had insisted on getting to know his nephew better, even if it meant ordering food from a simple diner Jack recommended. "Thomas always said true wealth was in people, not bank accounts." Jack played with the paper napkin, thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm betraying who I was by accepting all this help. Or maybe," Alexander responded gently, "you're just allowing your family to help you, as it should have been from the start." At night, alone in his room, Jack looked out the window at the city lights. His world was changing, expanding in ways that both frightened and excited him. On his desk, next to his schoolbooks, lay an access card for the Bennett building, a symbol of the new chapter unfolding in his life. The crescent moon cast its silvery light over the city, illuminating both the grand mansions and the modest buildings. Somewhere between these two worlds, Jack was beginning to find his own place, building bridges over chasms that once seemed insurmountable. Autumn painted the streets in golden hues as Jack's life began to find its new rhythm. At the Bennett mansion, where he now spent some afternoons at Alexander's insistence, each room held fragments of his father's story, a story that slowly gained colors and textures through the memories shared by those who knew him. One particular afternoon, while sifting through old photographs in Alexander's office, Jack found a journal. The yellowed pages bore Thomas's determined handwriting, words that traversed time to touch the heart of the son he never knew. "I found something that belonged to your father," Alexander said, entering the office quietly. His eyes, usually firm and controlled, revealed a rare softness. "These are social projects he was secretly developing. Thomas believed our fortune carried a greater responsibility than just accumulating more wealth." Jack flipped through the pages reverently, discovering a father who dreamed of building schools in underserved neighborhoods, creating scholarship programs and establishing community centers. "Why was none of this carried out?" "Because I was blind," Alexander admitted, sitting down heavily. "I was so focused on maintaining the Bennett empire that I couldn't see the true legacy my brother wanted to build." Melissa, who had become a constant presence in Jack's life, found him later in the garden, where the flowers bravely resisted the autumn chill. "You're different today," she observed, sitting beside him on the stone bench. "I found out I'm more like my father than I thought," Jack responded, sharing the pages of the journal with her. He wanted to make a difference, Melissa. Not just accumulate fortunes. Her eyes sparkled with understanding. "That's why you keep working at the diner, even though you don't need to anymore." "Those people are my family too," Jack explained. Mr. Rodriguez gave me a chance when no one else would. Maria always saved leftovers for me to take to my mother when she was sicker. His hands gently held the diary. I can't just abandon them. In the small apartment kitchen, Sophie watched the changes in her son with motherly eyes. Jack was still the same responsible and caring boy, but now he carried a new light, a purpose that went beyond mere survival. Your father would be proud, she said one evening as Jack talked about his idea of using part of the Bennett inheritance to create a scholarship program for young people from his old neighborhood. You have his heart, son. And now you have the means to make the difference he always dreamed of. Surprisingly, Alexander was the first to support Jack's initiative. Perhaps it's time for the Bennetts to realize that true leadership isn't about control, but about compassion, he reflected, his voice bearing the weight of years of regrets and the promise of change. In his room, Jack kept his father's diary along with his own notes, plans and dreams that were beginning to take shape. On the wall, a new photograph found its place. He and Melissa, smiling, surrounded by their friends from the diner during a small celebration. It was an image that perfectly captured the bridge he was building between his two worlds. Winter arrived, bringing more than just snow to the city. At the Bennett mansion, walls that once held secrets now witnessed the birth of new family bonds. Alexander, the businessman who had built his life on numbers and control, was slowly discovering the joy in the small things his brother had so cherished. One night, during an impromptu dinner in the kitchen, something unthinkable months earlier, Sophie shared stories about Thomas that made Alexander's eyes glisten with unshed tears. He used to show up at the cafe where I worked, always at the end of my shift, Sophie recalled, her voice soft with memory. Not for coffee but to listen to me talk about my dreams of studying nursing. Thomas believed everyone deserved a chance to grow. Melissa, sitting close to Jack, held his hand under the table. Is that why you decided to use part of the inheritance to create scholarships? It's more than that, Jack replied, his eyes meeting his uncle's. It's about continuing the legacy my father couldn't fulfill. Not just giving money but creating real opportunities for change. Alexander placed his fork on the table, a gesture that carried the weight of an important decision. I found something in the company's old files, he said. Thomas had started to structure a foundation. All the documents were ready, but his voice faltered. I filed them away after he died. I couldn't deal with another reminder of how much better he was than me. You were wrong, Sophie said gently. Thomas wasn't better than you, Alexander. He just saw the world differently. And now, through Jack, you have the chance to see that world too. At the diner, where Jack still insisted on working a few nights a week, his two worlds began to blend in surprising ways. Melissa had become a beloved presence among the staff, learning to make milkshakes with Maria and listening to Mr. Rodriguez's stories about how he started the business. You know what I love most about you? Melissa said to Jack one night as she helped clean tables after the shift. It's how you manage to belong everywhere without losing who you are. The comment touched Jack deeply. Amid the changes of the past few months, his greatest concern had always been to keep his essence. Maybe it's because I finally understand that I don't have to choose between worlds. I can be a Bennett and still be Sophie's son, still be the boy who grew up helping at the diner. At home, Sophie found her own way of healing. Her health was gradually improving, and with it, the courage to face old wounds grew. One morning, she asked to visit Thomas's grave for the first time in 15 years. Alexander accompanied her, and together, they shared a moment of forgiveness and reconciliation that had long been needed. He brought us together even after he left, Sophie whispered, her words carrying the weight of years of secrets finally released. Through Jack, Thomas taught us that family goes beyond blood or name. It's about choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to forgive. Spring brought more than just flowers to the Bennett garden. In the mansion's old library, Alexander opened a box he had kept for years. In it, dozens of letters Thomas never had the chance to send to Sophie. Each envelope contained not only words of love but dreams, plans, and hopes for the future he imagined building. He wrote this one on the night he died, Alexander said softly, handing a yellowed envelope to Jack. Thomas was on his way to tell me about you. He wanted my blessing, not my permission. Jack's hands trembled as he opened the letter. His father's handwriting, firm and clear, revealed a heart full of love and hope. Dear Sophie, today our son will gain more than just a father. He will gain an entire family. Alexander may seem tough, but I know he will love our boy as much as I already do. I can't wait to see you both running through these halls, filling this old house with true laughter. Melissa, sitting beside Jack, held his hand as silent tears streamed down his face. Your father was right about one thing, she whispered. You brought new life to this house. In the mansion's kitchen, Sophie prepared tea with the same simple cups she had brought from her apartment. A small ritual that gradually transformed the formal environment into a true home. Thomas always said a place becomes a home when it has stories to tell, she commented, serving tea to Alexander. And now we have so many new stories, Alexander replied, his voice carrying a warmth that once seemed impossible. Jack didn't just save Melissa that day, he saved all of us. In the office they now shared, uncle and nephew worked on the final details of the Thomas Bennett Foundation. The project was not just a tribute, it was the fulfillment of a dream that transcended generations. Each scholarship will bear the name of someone who helped us get here, Jack explained, showing the documents to Melissa. The first will be in Mr. Rodriguez's name, who taught me that hard work and kindness go hand in hand. Melissa smiled, recognizing in Jack's words the same compassion Thomas had shown in his letters. You've turned pain into something beautiful, she said. You're not just honoring your father, you're creating your own legacy. On a quiet afternoon, Sophie found Alexander alone in the garden, contemplating the rose bushes Thomas had loved so much. He would be proud of you too, she said gently, for having the courage to change, to open your heart. It took me so long to understand what Thomas always knew, Alexander replied, his voice choked with emotion. That true wealth isn't in the bank vaults but in the bonds we build, in the lives we touch. Jack watched the scene from the library window, feeling a peace he never thought possible. In his hands, his father's diary and the new pages he was beginning to write, not just with words but with actions that turned dreams into reality. A year had passed since that afternoon that changed everything. The Bennett Mansion garden bloomed in vibrant colors, celebrating not just the arrival of summer but also the inauguration of the Thomas Bennett Foundation. On the carefully prepared lawn, white chairs lined up in perfect rows, occupied by a unique mix of people representing the different chapters of Jack's life. In the front row, Sophie smiled, her restored health reflected in the brightness of her eyes. Beside her, Alexander was no longer the distant businessman he had once been. His relaxed shoulders and genuine smile revealed a man transformed by the power of family love. Melissa, radiant in a simple blue dress, helped distribute the scholarship program folders. Each contained a photo of Thomas and one of his favorite quotes, "True inheritance is not in what we possess, but in what we share." Jack stepped onto the small stage, his heart overflowing with emotions as he saw his two worlds finally united. Mr. Rodriguez and Maria from the diner sat next to prominent executives. His old neighbors mingled with the city's elite. There were no divisions, only people united by the hope of a better future. My father never got to know me, Jack began, his voice firm and clear, but through his words, his dreams, and most importantly, the love he left behind, he taught me the greatest lesson of all. Family is not just about blood or name, it's about choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to make a difference. His words touched every heart present. Sophie discreetly wiped away a tear, while Alexander held her hand in a gesture of mutual comfort and understanding. The Thomas Bennett Foundation is not just about giving opportunities, Jack continued. It's about building bridges between worlds that seem distant but have always been connected by the most fundamental thing in all of us, our humanity. The first group of scholars, young people full of dreams and determination, smiled in the audience. Among them were faces that reminded Jack of himself a year ago, carrying hopes greater than their resources allowed. Melissa joined Jack on the stage, bringing with her a surprise, Thomas's old diary, now bound together with new entries, stories of every life touched by the foundation, every dream realized, every bridge built. This book represents our journey, she said, her voice soft but firm. Not just the story of Thomas, Sophie, and Alexander, but of all of us. Each page is a reminder that it's never too late to rebuild, to forgive, to love. At the end of the ceremony, as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jack found a moment of quiet in his father's old office. Thomas's portrait smiled from the wall, next to a new photograph. The whole family gathered, including the friends from the diner, the new scholars, all those who were now part of this extraordinary story. Sophie found her son there, contemplating the photographs. "Your father was right, you know," she said softly. "You truly brought new life to this house, to all of us." Jack hugged his mother, feeling the sweet weight of all they had achieved. Through the window he could see Melissa and Alexander talking with the scholars, while Mr. Rodriguez told one of his lively stories, making everyone laugh. This was his true legacy. Not the buildings, not the bank accounts, but this moment, these people, this love that transcended all barriers. Leave your like, subscribe to the Soul and History channel, and share your impressions in the comments. Together, we will continue bringing stories that touch the heart and remind us of the transformative power of love and determination. See you next time.